The first thing I lost was my home on Juniper Ridge Lane, swallowed by flames while I stood barefoot in the freezing dark. The second thing I lost was the illusion that my mother loved me. When I called her from a grocery store parking lot, shaking and smelling of smoke, she didn't cry. She laughed. That sharp, ugly sound told me the fire wasn't just an accident, it was an opportunity she had been waiting for all along. The smell hit me before the sound did. It was not the cozy scent of a wood stove or a campfire, but something chemical and sharp, like melting plastic and burning hair. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, the darkness of my room pulsating with an orange glow that should not have been there. It was 14 minutes past 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. I knew this because the neon numbers on my bedside clock were the last thing I saw before the power cut out with a heavy, final thud. I did not scream. I did not freeze. Instinct took over, a cold and rigid pilot steering my terrified body. I rolled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the hardwood floor that was already uncomfortably warm. The smoke was banking down from the ceiling, a thick gray velvet curtain lowering to suffocate me. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. I grabbed my wallet from the dresser. I snatched my heavy winter coat from the hook on the back of the door. That was it. That was all I took. I scrambled down the hallway, coughing as the acrid air seared my throat. The living room was already gone, eaten by a wall of fire that roared like a living thing. The heat pushed me back, physical and violent, forcing me toward the kitchen door. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers shaking so hard I nearly dropped the keys. But then the lock turned, and I threw myself out into the biting Oregon night. I ran until I reached the edge of the street, the asphalt tearing at the soles of my feet. And then I turned around, my house. My starter home on Juniper Ridge Lane, the place I had scraped and saved for 7 years to buy, the place where I had painted the walls a soft sage green and finally felt safe. It was being devoured. The windows blew out, shattering with a sound like a gunshot, sending showers of glass onto the lawn I had just mowed 2 days ago. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. But they were too late. I stood there, shivering in my coat with nothing underneath but a thin t-shirt and sleep shorts, watching my life turn into ash. By the time the fire department had doused the flames, the sun was beginning to bleed gray light over the horizon. The house was a skeleton, blackened and dripping, steam rising off it in ghostly plumes. A paramedic checked me over, gave me a blanket, and asked if I had somewhere to go. I nodded, though I was not sure if it was true. I drove to the Safeway parking lot 3 miles away. My hands were soot-stained on the steering wheel of my sedan, the only major asset I had left. I parked in the far corner, away from the early morning shoppers, and stared at my phone. I needed my mother. It was a primitive, childish need. I was 33 years old, a grown woman with a career in marketing and a mortgage, or at least. I had a mortgage yesterday, but in that moment, I just wanted Marjorie Morgan to tell me it was going to be all right. I wanted her to be the mother I always hoped she would be in a crisis, not the one she actually was. I dialed her number. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Her voice was thick with sleep. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "It is me. Eliana. Eliana, do you know what time it is?" "My house?" I choked out, the tears finally spilling over. "Mom, my house burned down. It is gone. Everything is gone." There was a silence on the other end. I held my breath, waiting for the gasp, the sympathy, the rush of concern. Then I heard it. A short, sharp exhalation, a chuckle. It was not a loud laugh, but it was distinct. It was the sound of someone reacting to a dark joke they had expected all along. It was dry, awkward, and devoid of horror. "Well," Marjorie said, her voice shifting from sleepy to matter-of-fact, "that is what happens when you do not do things right. Eliana," the phone slipped slightly in my sweaty grip. "What I told you that old place was a money pit," she said, sounding almost vindicated. "You never listen. You always have to do things your way. And now look, I am in a parking lot," I whispered, staring at a discarded shopping cart wedged against a curb. I have nothing. Mom, I am barefoot. Well, I cannot help you with that right now, she said. Darius is coming over for breakfast in an hour, and I have not even started the coffee. You should call your insurance company. That is what you pay them for, isn't it? She did not offer a guest room. She did not ask if I was hurt. She did not ask if I was cold. Call us when you get yourself sorted out, she added, and do not make a scene. Eliana, you know how you get. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time. The silence of the car louder than the fire had been. I replayed that sound in my head. The laugh. It settled in my chest, right next to the smoke inhalation, heavy and bruising. I did not call her back. For the next 2 nights, I slept on the beige microfiber couch of a coworker, a kind girl named Sarah, who looked at me with wide, pitying eyes. I told her I was fine. I told her insurance would sort it out quickly. I went to work wearing clothes Sarah lent me, which were a size too small, cutting into my waist and making me feel like an imposter in my own body. By the 3rd night, I felt like a burden. Sarah had a boyfriend who stayed over often, and their hushed arguments in the bedroom about how long I would stay made my skin crawl. So I checked into the Starlight Motel on the edge of town, a place where the carpet felt sticky and the air smelled of stale cigarettes. When the money started to get tight, I slept in my car. I parked on quiet residential streets, reclining the seat and covering myself with the winter coat that still smelled of the fire. I showered at the gym before work. I put on my makeup in the rearview mirror. I walked into the office every morning with a smile plastered on my face, terrified that if I let it slip, I would shatter completely. I am handling it. I told my boss when he asked, but I was not handling it. I was drowning. The first real shock came 5 days after the fire. I was sitting in my car during my lunch break, eating a granola bar. When I called Harbor Light Mutual, I had filed the claim immediately. Assuming the process would be straightforward, I had paid my premiums on time every single month for 4 years. I am looking at your file. Ms. Morgan, the representative said. Her voice was tinny and detached. It looks like there is a hold on the processing. A hold, I asked. Why? Well, the system shows an unusual coverage adjustment made last quarter, she said. It triggered a review. I frowned, a piece of granola turning to dust in my mouth. I did not make any adjustments last quarter. I have not changed my policy since I bought the house. The record shows a request to reduce structural coverage and increase the deductible, she said. It was processed on the 12th of October. That is impossible, I said, my voice rising. I would never do that. Why would I lower my coverage, I cannot say, ma'am. But because of the timing reducing coverage just a few months before a total loss, it has been flagged for a fraud investigation. Fraud. I felt the blood drain from my face. I did not do this. You have to believe me. We have to follow the protocol, she said. An investigator will be in touch. I hung up, my hands shaking. October 12th. I tried to remember where I was on October 12th. It was a Tuesday. I was at work. I was always at work. The investigator, a man named Grant Hallowell, met me at the site of the fire 2 days later. The house looked even worse in the daylight, a charred, gaping wound in the neighborhood. Grant was tall, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite, but his eyes were kind. He wore a heavy canvas jacket and carried a clipboard. Ms. Morgan, he said, shaking my hand. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you, I said automatically. It felt like a line I had memorized. I wanted to walk you through what we found, he said, leading me toward the back of the property. We have determined the point of origin. It appears to have started here, on the exterior back wall. He pointed to a blackened patch of siding near the patio door. There was an electrical outlet here. He said, Did you use it often? I stared at the spot. No, I said, I never used it. It was loose when I bought the house. The cover plate rattled if you touched it, so I just left it alone. I meant to get it fixed, but I never got around to it. It was loose, Grant asked, making a note on his clipboard. Yes. Why? He hesitated. The burn pattern suggests significant heat generation right at that junction. Usually, That happens when a circuit is overloaded or if there is faulty wiring, but if you never used it. He trailed off, looking at the charred remains of the wall. Is that bad? I asked. For the claim? It is complicated, he said. Electrical fires are common, but combined with the coverage change your adjuster mentioned, the company is going to look at this very closely. They might argue it was negligence if the outlet was known to be faulty. I felt a wave of nausea. I did not neglect it. I just did not use it. I know, he said softly. I am just telling you how they think. As Grant walked back toward his truck, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. My stomach tightened. It was my brother, Darius. He stepped out, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly salary used to be. Darius was 4 years older than me, handsome in a way that made people trust him until they knew him. He walked over the debris-strewn lawn, stepping carefully to avoid getting ash on his polished shoes. Eliana, he said, opening his arms as if to hug me, but stopping short when he saw the soot on my coat. You look terrible. Thank you. Darius, I said, crossing my arms. Mom sent me. He said, she is worried about you. She says you are not returning her calls. I called her the night it happened. I said, she laughed at me. Darius rolled his eyes. You know how she is. She was probably in shock. She does not mean it. She meant it. I said, look, he said, dropping the concerned brother act. I talked to Mom. She thinks you are spiraling. She thinks you are going to mess this up. Mess what up? My life. It is already messed up. Darius. The insurance, he said, lowering his voice. These companies, Eliana, they look for any reason not to pay. Mom thinks you should let her handle the calls. You are too emotional right now. You are going to say something stupid and void your policy. I am not emotional, I said, though my voice was shaking, and I am capable of handling my own affairs. Are you? He asked. You are living in your car. Eliana, someone saw you sleeping on Elm Street last night. It is embarrassing for the family. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. If it is so embarrassing, why did neither of you offer me a place to stay? Darius adjusted his cufflinks. It is complicated. Mom has her blood pressure issues. She cannot handle the stress of a house guest. And Lena and I, well, we have the new baby coming. We do not have the room. You have 4 bedrooms. Darius. He waved a hand dismissively. That is not the point. The point is, you need help. Mom wants you to sign an authorization form. It lets us talk to the insurance company on your behalf, just to make sure they do not take advantage of you. I looked at him, really looked at him. There was a glint in his eye not of concern, but of calculation. He was rushing me. I am not signing anything. I said, Eliana, be reasonable. No, he sighed, shaking his head like I was a stubborn child. Fine, do it the hard way. But when they deny your claim because you cried on the phone, do not come running to us. He turned and walked back to his SUV. I watched him drive away, a knot of unease tightening in my gut. Later that afternoon, I went to my mother's house. I told myself it was to pick up some mail that I had forwarded there, the only stable address I had left. But part of me was still looking for an explanation for the laugh. I let myself in with my key. The house smelled of lavender and lemon polish, the same as it had for 30 years. It was pristine, perfect, and cold. Mom, I called out. I heard her voice coming from the sunroom. She was on the phone. I walked quietly down the hallway, the plush carpet swallowing my footsteps. No, I know. I heard her say, she is a mess, a total disaster. I froze. She will take the payout and disappear, Marjorie said. Like always. She has never been responsible with money. Remember that loan I gave her for the car? I never saw a dime of that back. That was a lie. I had paid her back every cent, with interest. 3 years ago, I had the bank transfer receipts to prove it. Yes, exactly. Marjorie continued. That is why we need to get ahead of it. If the check comes to her, it will be gone in a week on clothes and vacations. She is unstable. I leaned against the wall. The breath knocked out of me. They were not just dismissing my pain. They were building a story. A narrative where I was the villain, the irresponsible daughter, the loose cannon, and they were telling it to anyone who would listen. I backed away. I did not confront her. I could not. I turned around, walked out the front door, and closed it softly behind me. The next day, a colleague at work, a woman named Sarah, who had let me sleep on her couch those first 2 nights, gave me a card. My cousin used this woman when her apartment flooded. Sarah said, "She is an independent adjuster. She fights the insurance company for you. You need someone on your side. Eliana." I looked at the card. Kendra Vale, public adjuster. I met Kendra at a diner on the edge of town. She was a woman in her 50s with short, steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She ordered black coffee and listened to me talk for 20 minutes without interrupting. When I told her about the coverage adjustment, she set her cup down hard. That is a classic move. But usually, the insurance company does not make it up. She said, "Someone submitted that request." "Eliana, I did not do it." I said, "I believe you." She said, "But here's the thing. To change coverage, you usually need access, passwords, security questions, or a written request with a signature." She leaned in. "If you did not do it, someone who knows you did. Someone who has your information." I thought of Darius. I thought of the authorization form he wanted me to sign. Kendra continued, "And if they lowered the coverage right before the fire, that looks suspicious to the insurer. They think you did it to lower your premium, or worse, that you planned the fire and messed up the paperwork. We need to see who submitted that change. Can we find that out? We can try," she said. "But Eliana, you need to lock everything down, change your passwords, notify the credit bureaus. If someone is messing with your insurance, they might be messing with other things too." I left the diner feeling a different kind of cold. It was not just bad luck. It was not just an accident. I was being targeted. I drove back to Juniper Ridge Lane. I needed to feel close to the truth, whatever it was. The house was taped off with yellow caution tape, but I ducked under it. I walked through the ash and debris to the back patio. I looked at the spot where the outlet used to be. The siding was melted, the wood charcoaled. I walked around to the front. The mailbox was still standing at the end of the driveway, a sturdy brick pillar I had built myself 2 summers ago. The metal door was hanging open. I frowned. I had checked it 3 days ago. I had left a plastic folder in there tucked way in the back containing the manuals for the furnace and the water heater, along with the receipts for the roof repair I had done last year. I thought they would be safer there than in my car. I reached inside, empty. My heart hammered. The folder was gone. Someone had been here. Someone had pried the box open and taken the only records I had left of the work I had done on the house. I looked up and down the street. The houses were quiet. But I felt eyes on me. I felt the weight of being watched. I got back in my car and locked the doors. My phone buzzed in my lap. It was an email notification. My stomach dropped when I saw the sender, Harbor Light Mutual. Document retrieval. I opened it. It was a forwarded automated message, likely sent to me by mistake, or as part of the discovery process Kendra had triggered. It was a confirmation of the coverage change request from October. Attached was a PDF. I opened it on my small phone screen. Zooming in. It was a digital form. At the bottom, there was a signature, Eliana Morgan. It looked like my signature, but slightly stiff, like someone tracing it, but it was the timestamp next to the digital signature that made the world stop spinning. Signed October 12th and 15 p.m. On October 12th at 2:15 p.m., I was not at a computer. I was not even in Lake Haven. I was at a mandatory district-wide marketing training seminar in Portland, sitting in a conference room with 0 cell service and no Wi-Fi. Listening to a keynote speaker, I had 40 witnesses and a time-stamped parking receipt to prove it. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the interior of my car. I had not signed this, but someone had used my name, my account, and my identity to destroy my safety net 3 months before the match was even struck, and they had done it while I was miles away, thinking I was safe. I looked at the empty mailbox. I thought of Marjorie's laugh. I thought of Darius's smooth, unbothered face. I was not just homeless, I was being hunted, and for the first time since the fire, I did not want to cry. I wanted to scream, but I swallowed it down, sharp and burning, and put the car in gear. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. The war for my life did not look like a battlefield. It looked like a stack of paper 3 inches thick, sitting on the passenger seat of my car. I had thought the fire was the worst part. I had thought the initial shock of standing barefoot on the pavement was the bottom of the well. I was wrong. The bottom was the bureaucracy that followed. It was the endless hours on hold with utility companies, the bank, the credit card issuers, and the DMV, trying to prove I existed when every document that defined me had turned to ash. I filed the formal dispute with Harbor Light Mutual 2 days after receiving the digital signature evidence. I sat in the business center of the Starlight Motel, typing on a sticky keyboard. My jaw set so tight it ached. I did not just send a letter, I sent a manifesto. I listed every interaction. I attached the time-stamped parking receipt from my training seminar in Portland to prove I could not have signed that coverage change. I dug through the cloud account I had thankfully synced weeks before the fire, pulling up photos of my furniture, my appliances, my wardrobe. It was exhausting work. It felt like I was cataloging ghosts. Here was the picture of the vintage armchair I found at an estate sale. Here was the receipt for the upgraded insulation I installed myself. Each item was a memory of stability, and each form I filled out felt like the insurance company was spitting on that memory. They treated me not like a victim who had lost everything, but like a criminal trying to rob a bank. Every time I spoke to a representative, their tone was clipped and suspicious. "Please submit the serial number for the television," they would say. "I do not have the serial number." I would reply, gripping the phone, "It melted. Then we cannot verify the value." It was a game of attrition. They wanted me to give up. They wanted me to look at the mountain of work and decide it was easier to take whatever crumbs they offered, but they did not know how stubborn I could be when I was backed into a corner. By the end of the second week, the motel was draining my bank account and my soul. I could not sleep. The walls were thin, and the sounds of the highway seeped into my dreams, turning into the roar of flames. I needed a place to live. I found the listing on a community bulletin board at the library. Small studio above garage. Quiet tenant preferred. I called the number, expecting a property management company, but a man answered. His voice was deep and slow, like gravel shifting in a riverbed. I met Miles Arden at the property that evening. He was a contractor, a man in his 40s with sawdust in his beard, and hands that looked like they had built half the town. The studio was small, clean, and smelled of cedar. It had a kitchenette, a bed, and a window that looked out over a vegetable garden. "It is not much," Miles said, leaning against the doorframe, "but it is warm. I heard about what happened on Juniper Ridge. I am sorry." I stood in the center of the room, feeling a sudden, overwhelming desire to lie down on the floor and sleep for a week. "How much?" I asked. He named a price that was $400 less than the market rate. I looked at him sharply. "That is too low." He shrugged. "I'm looking for a good tenant. Someone quiet. You seem quiet. I am not a charity case." "Mr. Arden?" I said, my voice harder than I intended. "I do not want favors." He looked at me, really looked at me, with eyes that were dark and unreadable. "It is not charity. It is a fair price for a good tenant. But if it makes you feel better, we can write up a lease at the full market rate, and I can give you a discount for the first 3 months because of the construction noise. I am renovating the main kitchen. It will be loud." I hesitated. It was a kind lie. We both knew it. But he offered it with such dignity that I could accept it without losing mine. "I want a written agreement." I said, "Everything in writing. No handshake deals." "Done," he said. I moved in the next day. For the first time in weeks, I unpacked my small duffel bag. I put my toothbrush in a cup by the sink. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the silence. It was the first breath of air I had taken since the fire, but the peace did not last. I met Kendra Vale at her office the following Tuesday. Her office was a cluttered room in a strip mall, filled with filing cabinets and the smell of stale coffee. She looked grim. "I tracked the digital footprint," she said, turning her monitor so I could see it. The screen showed a map of Lake Haven with a red circle overlaid on a residential area. Harborlight uses a third-party vendor called Northgate Policy Solutions to handle their policy adjustments, Kendra explained. It is a way to outsource the paperwork. The request to lower your coverage came through Northgate's portal. "Okay," I said. "So who logged in?" "We cannot see the specific device without a court order," she said, "but we can see the IP address block. The request originated from a residential internet connection provided by West Coast Cable." She tapped the red circle on the map. "It came from this radius," she said. I stared at the map. The red circle covered about 4 blocks. It included a park, a convenience store, and a cluster of large, manicured homes on the north side of town. My mother's neighborhood. The circle sat directly over Sycamore Drive, where Marjorie lived, where I had grown up. My stomach turned to lead. "It is not proof," I whispered. "No," Kendra said. "It is not proof. It could be a neighbor. It could be someone using her Wi-Fi. But Eliana, the request was made using your old account credentials, the ones you likely used on a family computer years ago." I stared at the map until the red lines blurred. I drove to my mother's house that afternoon. I told myself I was just going to ask questions. I told myself I would be calm. Marjorie was in the garden, deadheading her roses with vicious precision. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and gardening gloves that looked pristine. When she saw me, she sighed, as if my presence was a cloud blocking her sun. "Eliana," she said, "I thought you were working. I took the day off." I said, "I needed to handle some insurance things." She snipped a faded bloom. "I hope you are not causing trouble with them. Darius says you are being difficult." "I am not being difficult, Mom. I am trying to understand why my coverage was changed without my knowledge." She paused, the shears freezing in midair. "Changed? What are you talking about?" "Someone lowered my coverage in October," I said, watching her face closely. "Someone logged into my account and removed the protection on the structure. It means the payout will not cover the mortgage." "That is terrible," she said, but her voice was flat. She turned back to the roses. "Well, you always were careless with your passwords. The request came from this neighborhood." "Mom," I said quietly. She spun around, her eyes flashing. "Excuse me?" "The investigator traced the digital signal." I lied, slightly exaggerating what Kendra had found. "It came from an IP address on this street." Marjorie stared at me. Her face went through a complex series of contortions, shock, calculation, and then a mask of wounded outrage. "Are you accusing me?" she asked, her voice trembling with a performance of hurt. "Are you standing there, in my garden, accusing your own mother of sabotaging you?" "I am asking if you ever called them," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe you thought you were helping. Maybe you thought the premium was too high." "I would never touch your business," she snapped. "I have done nothing but support you. I raised you. I fed you. And this is the thanks I get. You failed to maintain your house. You let it burn down. And because you cannot accept your own failure, you come here and blame me." She took a step toward me, the shears still in her hand. "You are sick. Eliana," she hissed. "You are so desperate to be the victim that you are inventing conspiracies. Go ahead. Tell the insurance company your mother did it. See how crazy you look. They already think you are unstable." The words hit me like physical blows. She was not just denying it. She was twisting reality until I felt dizzy. She was using my vulnerability as a weapon. "I did not invent the fire. Mom," I said, my voice shaking, "and I did not invent the signature." "Get out," she said, turning her back to me. "Do not come back until you are ready to apologize." I walked back to my car, my legs feeling like jelly. I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, unable to put the key in the ignition. I felt crazy. That was her superpower. She could look at the sky, call it green, and say it with such conviction that you would check your own eyes. That evening, I was ready to crawl into a hole and never come out, but Simone Rivas would not let me. Simone was a friend from my old job, a graphic designer with bright purple braids and a laugh that could crack a window. She texted me, "Get dressed. We are going out. No arguments." I met her at a place called Emberline Commons. It was not a bar. It was a co-working space in a converted warehouse, with exposed brick walls and warm, industrial lighting. It was filled with women working on laptops, drinking tea, and talking in low, intense clusters. "What is this?" I asked, clutching my bag. "It is a workspace," Simone said, "but it is also a vibe. You need to be around people who are building things. Eliana, not people who are tearing you down." She introduced me to a woman named Sarah, who was launching a freelance coding business after being laid off while pregnant. She introduced me to frantic, brilliant women who were juggling divorces, lawsuits, and startups. We sat in a corner with mugs of herbal tea. I did not want to talk, but Simone nudged me. "Tell them," she said. So I did. I told them about the fire. I told them about the insurance. I told them about the laugh. I expected uncomfortable silence. I expected them to change the subject. Instead, the woman named Sarah nodded slowly. "My ex-husband canceled my car insurance 3 days before I got into an accident," she said. "He wanted me to lose my job so I would have to move back in with him. It is about control." Another woman, an older architect named B, leaned in. "Isolation is where the shame grows. Honey, they want you alone because, when you are alone, you believe what they tell you about yourself. When you are here, you see the pattern." I looked around the circle of faces. They were not pitying me. They were witnessing me. Shame thrives in isolation. The words settled in my chest, loosening the knot that had been there since the fire. My mother wanted me isolated. She wanted me ashamed. Because if I was ashamed, I would be silent. I left Emberline Commons that night with a membership application in my pocket and the first spark of real anger I had felt in weeks. Anger was better than grief. Anger was fuel. 2 days later, Grant Hallowell called me. "I need you to meet me at the site," he said. It was raining when I arrived. The charred remains of my house smelled even worse when wet, a sour, soggy stench of destruction. Grant was standing under the shelter of a remaining eave, his face grim. "We got some lab results back," he said, keeping his voice low, and he looked around to make sure we were alone. "We found traces of an accelerant on a rag found in the bushes, about 10 feet from the outlet." My breath hitched. "Arson. It is a volatile hydrocarbon," he said. "Similar to what you would find in paint thinner or certain cleaning solvents. It was not gasoline. It was subtler." "So someone said it," I asked, feeling a mix of vindication and terror. "It suggests intent," he said. "But Eliana, listen to me. It is a trace amount. It is not enough to prove a crime in court yet. A defense attorney would argue it was a rag you used for cleaning and dropped there by accident. I did not drop it." I said. "I know," he said, "but the insurance company does not know that. If we push this too hard without more evidence, they might turn it around on you. They might say you placed the accelerant to ensure the total loss." I stared at him. "You think they would accuse me of burning my own house?" "It happens every day," he said, "especially when there is a suspicious coverage change. They paint the homeowner as desperate. So what do I do?" "You wait," he said. "You let me keep digging. Do not confront anyone recklessly. If someone did this, they are watching to see if you figure it out. If you panic, they win." I nodded, the cold rain dripping down my neck. The pressure mounted from all sides. On Friday, Darius showed up at the marketing firm where I worked. He walked into the lobby like he owned the building, flashing a smile at the receptionist that made her blush. He took me to a coffee shop across the street. He bought me a latte and a scone, playing the role of the benevolent big brother. "Mom is really worried about you." "Eliana," he said, tearing off a piece of his muffin. "She says you came over and started shouting at her." "I did not shout," I said. "I asked a question." Darius sighed. "Look, we know you are in a bad spot. The insurance is dragging their feet. You are living in some garage. It is not right." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "We want to help," he said. Mom and I talked. We can float you. We can give you $50,000 to get started on a new place, or just to have some breathing room while you fight the insurance. $50,000. It was a lifeline. It was enough to put a down payment on a condo. It was enough to breathe. What is the catch, I asked. No catch, he said, smiling. Just family looking out for family. But, obviously, we need to protect the asset. Mom has been burned before lending money to relatives. He slid a document across the table. It is just a standard promissory note, he said, and a small lien agreement. It basically says that when the insurance payout comes through, or if you sell the land, we get paid back first. It secures the loan against the property title. I picked up the document. It was thick. The legal jargon was dense, but I had spent the last 2 weeks reading fine print. I scanned the clauses. Lender Marjorie Morgan maintains decision-making authority regarding property disposition. Borrower agrees to refrain from any legal action against lender. I looked up at Darius. This gives Mom control over the land. I said, if I sign this, I cannot sell the lot without her permission. And this clause here, it says I cannot sue her for anything. It is standard boilerplate. Eliana, Darius said, his smile tightening. It is just to make Mom feel secure. She is risking her retirement savings for you. She is not risking anything if she has a lien on the land. I said, the land alone is worth more than $50,000. You are being paranoid, he said, his voice dropping an octave. We are offering you cash. Today, you can walk out of here with a check, or you can go back to your garage and fight a billion-dollar insurance company alone. I looked at the check he had placed on the table. It was already written out. Eliana Morgan, $50,000. It was a trap, a golden, shiny trap. If I took this money, I belonged to them. I would never be able to prove they messed with my policy because I would have signed away my right to sue. They were buying my silence for $50,000. I pushed the check back. No, I said. Darius's eyes went cold. Do not be an idiot, Eliana. I am not an idiot, I said, standing up. That is the problem for you. Darius, I am not the mess you all need me to be. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the money on the table. My hands were shaking, but my head was clear. They were scared. You do not offer $50,000 to someone you despise unless you are afraid of what they might find. I went back to the neighborhood that weekend. I needed to find something that Grant had missed. I walked up and down the street, looking at the houses that faced mine. Across the street, 3 houses down, lived Mrs. Higgins. She was an elderly woman who spent her days watching the neighborhood through her blinds. I noticed a small white camera mounted above her garage door. It was pointed directly at the street. I knocked on her door. She answered in a floral housecoat, looking frail. Mrs. Higgins. I said, it is Eliana, from across the street. Oh, honey, she said, her eyes watering. I am so sorry. It was awful to watch. Just awful. I looked at her. You saw it. I woke up when the sirens came. She said, but my grandson, he put up that camera for me. To catch the package thieves. My heart leaped. Mrs. Higgins? Does that camera record? Would it have footage of my house from the night of the fire? She frowned, twisting her ring. Well, that is the strange thing. My grandson checked it for me the next day. He said the router was unplugged. Unplugged is... The cord was pulled right out of the wall in the hallway. I never touch it. I do not know how it happened. It stopped recording at about 10 o'clock that night. The fire started at 3. Didn't it? Yes. I said, my blood running cold. 3 in the morning. It was just bad luck, she said. I am so sorry. Dear, I thanked her and left. Bad luck. A loose outlet. A missing folder. A laugh on the phone. An unplugged router. It was not bad luck. It was a clean sweep. Someone had known exactly where that camera was and how to disable it, and Mrs. Higgins often left her back door unlocked for her cat. I was dealing with someone who knew the neighborhood, someone who knew the neighbors. Harbor Light Mutual made their move 3 days later. I received an email with the subject line, Final Settlement Offer. I opened it. The number was insulting. $120,000. It sounded like a lot of money, but the mortgage was $180,000. The demolition costs alone would be $15,000. This offer would leave me $60,000 in debt and homeless. The email was curt. Due to inconsistencies in the claim and the policyholder's lack of cooperation regarding the coverage adjustment investigation, Harbor Light Mutual is offering a compromise settlement to close this file. This offer expires in 5 business days. They were squeezing me. They were using the fraud flag, the flag my own family likely planted to justify paying me pennies on the dollar. I sat in my studio apartment, looking at the screen. I had 5 days. If I took it, I was ruined. If I fought it, I could be tied up in court for years, paying lawyers I could not afford. While the bank foreclosed on the charred remains of my lot, I remembered the women at Emberline Commons. You need to be around people who are building things. I did not need to build a house right now. I needed to build a case. I picked up my phone and called a number Simone had given me. Celeste Whitaker. I asked when the woman answered. Speaking. My name is Eliana Morgan. I have a fire claim with Harbor Light Mutual. They are trying to settle for peanuts because of a coverage change I didn't authorize. I can fit you in on Thursday. Celeste said, Bring everything. I met Celeste in her office downtown. She was sharp, terrifying, and wore a suit that looked like armor. She listened to my story, looked at the digital signature, looked at the map Kendra had made, and looked at the lowball offer. She did not smile. She did not offer me tea. She leaned back in her chair and tapped a pen against the desk. They are trying to time you out, she said. They know you are bleeding cash. They assume you will fold. What do we do? I asked. We do not negotiate with the offer, she said. We ignore the offer. We file a complaint against Harbor Light for bad faith handling, and more importantly, we file an emergency motion for the preservation of evidence. What evidence? The metadata, she said. Northgate Policy Solutions. If that coverage change came from a third party, there are logs, detailed server logs that show the MAC address of the device, the browser version, the keystrokes. Northgate purges those logs every 90 days to save server space. I did the math. The fire was in January. The change was in October. We are close to the limit. I said, We are on the edge, she said. But if we file this motion, they cannot delete it. It freezes the record. And if we get that MAC address, Eliana, we can match it to a specific device, a laptop, a tablet. I remembered something, a Christmas gift. 4 years ago, I had given my mother an iPad. I had set it up for her. I had used my own Apple ID to download the initial apps because she did not have one yet. If that tablet was still logged into my old accounts, do it. I said to Celeste, File it. It will cost you, she warned. And once we file, Harbor Light will stop playing nice. They will dig into your life. They will depose your friends, your boss, your family. Let them dig. I said. Celeste nodded and began to type. I walked out of her office into the gray Oregon afternoon. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp. I felt a vibration in my pocket, another text from Darius, asking if I had thought about the proposal. I did not text back. I was done reacting. I went to the post office and mailed a certified letter to Harbor Light, rejecting their settlement. Then I went to the store and bought a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, My mom laughed. I stared at the words. Then, underneath, I wrote, Now it is my turn to speak. The fuse was lit. It was burning slow and quiet toward the powder keg that was my family's web of lies. They thought they had buried me in the ashes of my own home. They did not realize that ash is just carbon, and under enough pressure, carbon becomes something unbreakable. I was ready for the heat. The document Celeste Whitaker slid across her mahogany desk was not thick, but it hit the surface with the weight of a coffin lid. This is the call log from Harbor Light's customer service center, Celeste said, her voice devoid of the usual legal crispness. It was softer, laced with a pity I did not want. We subpoenaed the metadata for all incoming calls associated with your policy number for the 6 months prior to the fire. I picked up the paper. It was a spreadsheet, dense with dates, times, and duration codes. Look at the column on the left. Celeste instructed. That is the originating number. I scanned the list. My eyes snagged on a number I knew better than my own social security number. It was the landline at the house on Sycamore Drive. My mother's house. August 4th, 12 minutes. August 22nd, 18 minutes. September 10th, 6 minutes. October 12th, the day of the digital signature, 2 calls, one lasting 45 minutes. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my hands cold and numb. She called them. I whispered, repeatedly. Celeste said, "We do not have the audio recordings yet. Those are harder to get without a court order alleging criminal fraud, which we are building toward, but the frequency is damning. Eliana, you are the only named policyholder, unless you gave her explicit verbal authorization on a recorded line. They should not have been speaking to her at all. I never gave authorization. I said, I never even told her who my insurer was. She must have gone through my mail, or she guessed. Celeste said, Harbor Light is a major carrier in the region, but look at the dates. She was calling them months before the fire. She was discussing your policy, likely asking about coverage limits, deductibles, and structural valuations. She was casing your house, Eliana, but she was doing it over the phone. I stared at the paper until the numbers blurred into black smears. October 12th. The day I was in Portland, she had been on the phone with them for 45 minutes. That was plenty of time to impersonate me, provide my social security number, which she obviously knew, and authorize the changes that would later ruin me. Why, I asked, the words sounding small in the large office. Why would she strip the coverage if she wanted money? Wouldn't she want the payout to be maxed out? That is the question, Celeste said. Reducing the coverage lowers the premium. Sure, but it also lowers the scrutiny level for smaller claims. Or perhaps she intended to add herself as a beneficiary and messed it up. We do not know the motive yet, but we know the method. I walked out of Celeste's office into the blinding afternoon sun. I felt sick, not the butterflies in the stomach kind of sick, but a deep, visceral nausea that roiled in my gut. I made it to my car before my legs gave out. I collapsed into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. I screamed. It was a guttural, animal sound that tore at my throat. I pounded the steering wheel with the heels of my hands until my palms stung. I cried until my chest heaved and my vision swam. For 33 years, I had tried. I had tried to be the good daughter. I had tried to be the successful one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything so that maybe, just maybe, she would love me for being easy. I had lent her money I never asked for back. I had spent holidays listening to her criticize my hair, my job, my lack of a husband, biting my tongue until it bled because I thought that was the price of admission to a family. And all that time, while I was trying to be perfect, she was calling a stranger at a call center, methodically dismantling my safety net. She did not just laugh when the house burned. She had helped strike the match. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat. My eyes in the rearview mirror were red and swollen. I looked pathetic. I looked like a victim. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a yellow sticky note and a pen. My hand was shaking, but I forced it to be steady. I wrote one sentence. No more pleading for love from people who trade it. I stuck the note to the dashboard, right next to the speedometer. I stared at it. It was a rule. It was a law. It was the new constitution of my life. I put the car in gear and drove to the grocery store. I needed milk. I needed bread. I needed to pretend I was a human being who did normal things. I was in the produce aisle, inspecting a bruised apple, when I heard a familiar voice. Well, if it isn't Eliana, I stiffened. It was Mrs. Gable, the choir director at my mother's church. She was a woman who wore aggressive perfume and wielded gossip like a shiv. Hello, Mrs. Gable, I said, placing the apple in my basket. We have been praying for you, she said, her eyes scanning my outfit, jeans and a thrifted sweater. It is such a tragedy. But the Lord provides. Doesn't he, I suppose? I said, trying to move past her cart. Your mother tells us you are doing quite well, considering, Mrs. Gable said, blocking my path. She said the insurance settlement was substantial. I stopped. Excuse me, Oh, you do not have to be modest with me, she said, leaning in. Marjorie told the prayer circle. She said you got the check weeks ago. She is a bit hurt. You know, she said you are hoarding it all for yourself, refusing to help the family with the medical bills for Darius's baby. I felt the room tilt. Darius's baby was not even born yet, and I had not received a dime. She told you I have the money I asked. My voice deadly quiet. Well, yes, she said you are claiming poverty to get sympathy, but that you are sitting on a gold mine. Honestly, Eliana, after all she has done for you, she let the sentence hang there, heavy with judgment. I looked at this woman, this stranger who thought she knew the topography of my soul because my mother had drawn her a map of lies. Mrs. Gable, I said, I am currently living in a garage. I have not received a single dollar from the insurance company because my policy was tampered with. My mother is lying to you. Mrs. Gable recoiled as if I had slapped her. Well, there is no need to be nasty. I can see why Marjorie is so distressed. She turned her cart and marched away toward the dairy section. I stood there, shaking. Marjorie was inoculating the community against me. She was spreading the lie that I was a greedy, ungrateful daughter, so that when the truth finally came out, when I finally exposed her, no one would believe me. They would just see a bitter daughter attacking a saintly mother. It was brilliant. It was evil. I left the cart in the aisle and walked out. I could not eat. I drove to Emberline Commons. I needed air that wasn't poisoned. The warehouse was buzzing with activity. Simone waved at me from a beanbag chair, but I headed straight for the long communal table where I had set up my temporary workspace. I opened my laptop, but I couldn't focus on my own spreadsheet. Next to me, a woman named Teresa was on the phone, her voice rising in panic. No, I sent that in. She was saying, I faxed it 3 times. You cannot deny the unemployment claim because you lost the fax. She slammed the phone down and put her head in her hands. I hesitated. Then, I slid my chair over. Do you have a digital copy? I asked. Teresa looked up. Her mascara smudged. What, do you have a PDF of the document you faxed? And the transmission receipt? Yes, but they say they cannot find it in the portal. I pulled up a blank email on my screen. Don't fax it, I said. Faxes go into a black hole. You need to email the escalation desk. I have the format. You attach the document, the receipt, and you reference the specific statute that says they have 48 hours to acknowledge receipt. If you quote the statute, their software flags it for a supervisor. Teresa stared at me. How do you know that? I shrugged. I used to manage client compliance for a marketing firm, and lately, I have become an expert in fighting bureaucracies. I helped her draft the email. We attached the files. We hit send. 10 minutes later, Teresa got a ping. It was a confirmation of receipt and a case number assignment. Oh my God, she said, breathing out a sigh that seemed to deflate her entire body. Thank you. I have been fighting them for 3 weeks. It was a small victory. But then Sarah, the coder, came over. Hey, Eliana, she said. I heard you helped Teresa. Can you look at this lease agreement? My landlord is trying to keep my security deposit. Then B came over with a medical billing dispute. For the next 3 hours, I did not think about Marjorie. I did not think about the fire. I sat there, reading fine print, spotting inconsistencies, drafting firm, polite, terrifying letters. I was calm. I was precise. I was compassionate. I realized something as I helped B highlight a billing error. I had spent my entire life using these skills to smooth over my family's chaos. I had read contracts for Darius. I had negotiated bills for my mother. I had been their fixer, their secretary, their shield. I had thought those skills were just part of being a daughter. They were not. They were my power. And I had been giving them away for free to people who hated me. Grant Hallowell called me on Thursday. I have something. He said, Can you meet me at the station? I went to the fire station. Grant led me into a small office that smelled of turnout gear and old coffee. He placed a plastic evidence bag on the desk. Inside was a small, blackened metal rectangle. The outlet cover plate. We cleaned it up in the lab. Grant said, Look at the screw holes. I peered closely. The metal was warped, but the holes were visible. The screws we found in the debris directly below this plate were drywall screws. Grant said, "Coarse thread, sharp point. The screws that come with these electrical boxes are machine screws. Fine thread, flat tip. What does that mean?" I asked. "It means someone took the plate off," he said, "and when they put it back on or tried to, they lost the original screws or didn't have a screwdriver that fit. So they jammed drywall screws in there to hold it in place." He leaned back. "You do not use drywall screws for electrical plates, Eliana. They go too deep. They can pierce the insulation on the wires behind the plate. If the insulation is pierced," I started, "it creates an arc fault." Grant finished. "A spark. Over time. That spark heats up the surrounding material. The insulation smolders. And eventually, ignition." I stared at the bag. It was not an accident. It was a booby trap. "This proves tampering," Grant said. "It proves human intervention. It wasn't just a loose wire. Someone removed that plate, messed with the guts, and put it back on with the wrong hardware." "Can we prove who?" I asked. "Not from the screws," he said. "They are standard hardware store issue, millions of them. But combined with the accelerant trace, we are moving from undetermined to incendiary. That means arson." My heart hammered. Arson. It was a heavy, ugly word. I left the station and called Celeste. She listened to the update without interrupting. "That matches what I'm seeing on my end," she said. "What are you seeing?" "Northgate Policy Solutions," she said. I reached out to a few colleagues in the insurance litigation world. I asked if anyone else had seen weird coverage adjustments from this vendor. And Eliana, you are not a unicorn. I found 3 other cases in this county alone. All Harbor Light policyholders. All had their coverage limits tweaked or deductibles raised shortly before a claim was filed. "A fraud ring?" I asked. "It looks like it," Celeste said. "Northgate might be a shell company, or they have a rogue employee who sells access. Someone pays them a fee. They lower the coverage or alter the policy to make a claim easier to deny or maybe to facilitate a quick settlement that benefits a third party. A third party like a lien holder," I said, thinking of the loan Darius had tried to force on me. "Exactly." Celeste said, "If your family is involved with this, Eliana, they are swimming in deep water. This is federal wire fraud. This is RICO territory." The stakes shifted in that moment. It wasn't just about my mother being cruel. It was about my mother being a criminal. That night, I was back in my studio apartment, heating up soup on the hot plate, when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Eliana. It's Lena Crow. Darius's girlfriend, the mother of the grandchild Marjorie was already using as a pawn." "Lena," I said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "No," she whispered. She sounded like she was hiding in a closet. "Eliana, you need to know, Darius is in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Money trouble. Gambling, I think, or bad investments. I don't know. He never tells me the truth, but collectors have been calling the house. And Marjorie." She is frantic. "About what?" "There is a deadline," Lena said. "I heard them arguing in the kitchen last night. Marjorie was screaming that the payout was supposed to be here by now. She said the property deal is going to fall through if they don't have the cash by the 1st of the month." The property deal. The LLC I had seen mentioned on Darius's laptop screen once, months ago. They needed my insurance money. I realized they didn't just want it. They were counting on it. They had probably already spent it in their heads. "Lena," I said, "did they say anything about the fire?" Lena hesitated. There was a long silence. Darius said, "He said it was the only way to clean the slate. He said you were sitting on a winning lottery ticket and too stupid to cash it." I closed my eyes. They thought destroying my home was doing me a favor. A forced liquidation of assets. "Thank you for telling me. Lena, be careful." "Eliana," she said, "they are getting desperate. Marjorie is talking about taking legal action against you for elder abuse or something, saying you are stressing her into an early grave." I hung up. The soup was boiling over, sizzling on the burner, but I didn't move. I needed to see the paperwork. I dug out the plastic bin where I kept the few documents I had salvaged from the bank before the fire. The copies of my closing disclosure from 7 years ago. I had scanned them, but I needed to see the physical paper. I spread the closing packet out on my bed. Deed of trust. Promissory note. Title insurance. I flipped through the pages. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 5. I stopped. I flipped back. Page 3. Page 5. Page 4 was missing. I looked at the bottom of page 3. The sentence read, "Borrower agrees to the conditions set forth in the attached addendum regarding," and then page 5 started with, "Property maintenance and insurance requirements." The addendum was missing. I tried to remember the closing. It was a blur of signatures. Marjorie had been there. She had brought champagne. She had been so helpful, handing me papers, pointing where to sign. "Just sign here." "Eliana, don't worry about the fine print." The lawyer checked it. Had I signed a blank page, or a page that gave her rights? I didn't understand. If they had a signed document, a power of attorney, a lien, a transfer of interest that I didn't know about, they could have used it to authorize the Northgate changes. They could have used it to claim the payout. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty garage. The next morning, I saw Miles Arden in the driveway. He was loading lumber into his truck. He looked tired. "Miles," I said. He jumped. He turned to face me, and for the first time, he didn't meet my eyes. "Morning, Eliana. You knew them, didn't you?" I asked. Before I moved in. He stopped moving. He put the 2x4 down slowly. "I didn't know they were your family," he said, his voice rough. "Not until you told me your last name was Morgan and I saw the brother show up that day. You worked for Marjorie. I did a remodel on her kitchen 2 years ago," Miles said, "and I fixed some rot on the brother's deck. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed," he said. He looked at me then, his eyes full of a heavy, dark regret. "I heard them talking about you, Eliana, back then. What did they say? The mother? She complained about you constantly. Said you were ungrateful. Said she wished she could evict you from the family like a bad tenant." He kicked the tire of his truck. "And the brother? He asked me questions. Weird questions. Like what? Like how hard it is to make an electrical fire look accidental. The air left my lungs. He asked you that." "He made it sound like a joke," Miles said. "Like he was writing a book or something. I told him it's nearly impossible because inspectors are smart. I didn't think he was serious." I stared at Miles. He was a good man, a quiet man, and he was carrying the weight of a conversation that might have saved my house if he had reported it. "Will you testify to that?" I asked. "If it comes to it?" Miles looked at the ground, then at the garage where I was living, then at me. "Yes," he said, "I will." I went inside and called Celeste. We had the motive. We had the method. We had a witness to the intent. But Harbor Light was not waiting for us to assemble our weapon. They fired theirs first. That afternoon, a process server knocked on the door of the garage. He handed me a thick envelope. "Subpoena ducis tecum." I opened it. My hands shook. Harbor Light Mutual, represented by their powerhouse law firm, was demanding documents. Request 1. All employment emails from the plaintiff for the years 2023 to 2025. Request 2. All personal financial records, including credit card statements and bank transfers. Request 3. Complete medical records, including but not limited to therapy notes, psychiatric evaluations, and prescriptions for anxiety or depression medication. I read the justification paragraph. To assess the credibility of the plaintiff and determine if financial distress or mental instability contributed to the loss event. They were going to drag me through the mud. They were going to take my private sessions with my therapist where I talked about my mother's cruelty, my loneliness, my fears, and read them into the public record. They were going to use my vulnerability to paint me as crazy. It was personal. It was cruel. It was designed to break me. I looked at the sticky note on my dashboard through the window. No more pleading. I went back inside. I picked up the phone. "Celeste," I said when she answered, "they want my therapy records." "I know." Celeste said, "I just got the copy. It is a standard intimidation tactic. We will file a protective order. No. I said. I felt a cold, hard resolve settling over me like armor. No, Celeste asked. File the protective order. I said. But also, tell them we accept the challenge. If they want to talk about mental instability, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the gaslighting. Let's talk about the abuse. Eliana, Celeste warned, this will get ugly. It is already ugly. Celeste, my house burned down. My mother laughed. Now they want to call me crazy fine. I looked at the subpoena one last time. Let them come, I said. But tell them if they open my life, I am going to open theirs. And I have the keys. The legal system, I learned, has a very specific way of breaking women. It does not use fists. It uses paperwork. It uses the assumption that if you are angry, you are unstable, and if you are crying, you are hysterical. When Celeste Whitaker filed the motion for a protective order against Harbor Light's request for my therapy records, she was surgical. She stood in front of a judge, a tired man with gray thinning hair, and argued that my mental health history had no bearing on whether or not an electrical outlet had sparked a fire. Your Honor, she said, her voice cool and level. This is a fishing expedition. The defense is attempting to weaponize the plaintiff's private medical history to distract from the forensic evidence of the claim. Harbor Light's lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who wore a suit that cost more than my burned-down house, smirked. We simply need to establish the plaintiff's state of mind. If she has a history of dramatic behavior, it speaks to credibility. I sat at the table, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Dramatic behavior. That was the code. That was the trap. If I stood up and shouted that this was a violation, I proved his point. If I sat there and wept, I proved his point. I had to be stone. I had to be a statue. The judge granted the protective order, blocking the release of the notes but allowing a limited deposition regarding my emotional state on the day of the fire. It was a win, but it felt like a loss. I walked out of the courthouse feeling stripped. They had looked at my life not as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a specimen to be dissected. I went straight to work from the courthouse. I needed the normalcy of the office. I needed to be Eliana Morgan, senior marketing strategist, not Eliana Morgan, the woman living in a garage who might be crazy. David, my boss, called me into his office at 2 p.m. David was a good guy, or so I had always thought. He had sent flowers after the fire. He had told me to take all the time I needed. Eliana, have a seat, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his glass desk. He looked uncomfortable. He was shuffling papers, avoiding my eyes. We need to talk about the Kellerman account, he said. My stomach dropped. The Kellerman account was the biggest portfolio in the firm. I had landed it myself 2 years ago. I had built the strategy from the ground up. We were 3 weeks away from a major campaign launch. Okay, I said. Is there a problem with the creative? No, the creative is great, David said. But, look, Eliana, I know what you are going through. The lawsuit, the investigation. It is a lot. I am handling it. David, I said, my voice steady, it has not affected my work. I have not missed a deadline. I know, he said. But the client, they get nervous. Rumors fly in a small town like Lake Haven. Someone mentioned the arson investigation. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. It is not an arson investigation against me. David, I am the victim. Of course, he said quickly. We know that. But perception is reality in this business. We cannot afford any wobble. We need to reduce the risk on this account. I am going to move you to the back-end analytics team for a while. Just until this blows over, Sarah will take lead on Kellerman. I stared at him. Back-end analytics was data entry. It was a demotion in everything but title. He was taking my career, the one thing I had left that was purely mine, and putting it in a box because my life was messy. You are punishing me for having my house burned down. I said, I am protecting the firm. Eliana, he said, his voice hardening slightly. And honestly, you look exhausted. Take the lighter load. It is a gift. I walked out of his office. I did not slam the door. I went to my desk, packed my personal items, a mug, a spare charger, a framed photo of a dog I had as a child, and walked out. I did not quit. I could not afford to quit. But as I sat in the analytics cubicle in the back corner, staring at rows of mindless data, I realized that the fire had not just taken my past, it was eating my future. Disaster shrinks your world. It makes you small. It makes you a risk. But pressure also makes diamonds. Or, if not diamonds, at least something sharp enough to cut glass. I started the business 3 nights later. It began at Emberline Commons. I was sitting with Teresa, the woman I had helped with the unemployment claim. She had brought a friend, a woman named Mrs. Lee, whose husband had died without a will, leaving her in a labyrinth of probate and life insurance denials. She does not know what to do, Teresa said, pushing Mrs. Lee toward me. Look at this letter. Eliana, what does term exclusion mean? I took the letter. I read it. I explained it. I wrote a response for her on my laptop, citing the specific clause in her policy that overrode the exclusion. Mrs. Lee cried. She tried to give me a $20 bill. I pushed it back. No. I said, take it, Simone said from the next table. She was watching me. You are good at this. Eliana, you translate the bullshit into English. That is a service. That night, I registered the domain name. Morgan Recovery Consulting. It was not much, a simple landing page. Have you suffered a loss? Is the system fighting you? I can help you fight back. I did not have a license to practice law. I was careful to state that I was a documentation consultant. I helped people organize their files, draft their narratives, and communicate with adjusters. I got my first paying client 2 days later, a referral from Emberline, a young couple whose basement had flooded, and their insurer was claiming it was groundwater seepage, uncovered, rather than pipe failure covered. I went to their house. I took photos. I found the cracked pipe. I wrote a report that forced the adjuster to reverse the denial. When they handed me a check for $300, I felt something I had not felt since the night of the fire. I felt powerful. I was not just a victim of the system anymore. I was a mechanic who knew how to take the engine apart. But my own engine was stalling. Grant Hallowell called me on a Tuesday morning. His voice was tight. We have a problem, he said. I met him at a diner on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. The lab results on the outlet, he said. They are being retained. Retained, I asked. What does that mean? It means the state lab has not released the final official report, he said. My contact over there says it is stuck in quality review. That usually happens when a supervisor pulls a file because they do not like the conclusion. You think someone is pressuring them? I asked. Lake Haven is a small town. Eliana, Grant said, stirring his coffee, and Harbor Light is a big donor to the annual firefighters' ball. They sponsor the safety equipment drive. They have friends in high places. If they get wind that we are about to rule this as incendiary due to tampering, it opens them up to a massive liability lawsuit from you. They would rather it be undetermined. Undetermined means I get nothing. I said, undetermined means they can stick with the lowball offer and say they are being generous. Exactly. Grant said, I am pushing back, but I am just an investigator. I need you to know that the headwinds are getting strong. I drove back to my garage apartment feeling the walls closing in. The system was protecting itself. It always did. Then came the coffee date with Lena. I had not wanted to go. I did not trust anyone in Darius's orbit, but Lena had sounded frantic on the phone. We met at a small cafe near the university. Lena looked terrible. Her pregnancy was showing now. A round bump under her sweater, but her face was gaunt. She kept checking her phone. Darius doesn't know I am here. She said, What is it? Lena, I asked. Is he okay? He is drowning, she said. The collectors are calling the house every day. But that is not why I called you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of envelopes. She slid them across the table. I opened the top one. It was a credit card statement for a store called Lux Home Goods. The name on the account was Eliana Morgan. I do not have a card with them. I said, I know. Lena whispered. Marjorie opened it. 3 years ago. I stared at her. 3 years ago, she uses it for Christmas presents, Lena said. She maxes it out, pays the minimum, and then pays it off when she gets her tax refund. She has done it for years. I flipped through the other envelopes. A cell phone plan I didn't recognize. A subscription to a Wine of the Month club, a catalog credit line, all in my name, all sent to a P.O. box I didn't know existed. She told Darius it was fine, Lena said, tears welling in her eyes. She said, Eliana has good credit. She doesn't use it. It helps the family. She said you wouldn't mind, because you are. You know, because I am what I asked. My voice deadly calm. Because you are soft, Lena said. Because you always say yes. I looked at the statements. Thousands of dollars, small frauds, petty thefts. And Darius knew I asked. He helped her set up the P.O. box. Lena admitted. He said it was genius. He said it was a family resource. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the table. It was not just the fire. The fire was just the finale. They had been cannibalizing me for years. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was a host organism. I was a credit score with legs. They stole my identity to buy wine. I whispered. Lena reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. Eliana, please, she said. I found these in the home office. I couldn't let them keep doing it. Not after the house. Does she have a life insurance policy on me? I asked. The question hung in the air. Cold and terrifying. Lena went pale. I don't know. I didn't see one. I stood up. The nausea was gone. In its place was a silence. A deep, Arctic silence. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I gathered the envelopes and put them in my bag. Thank you, Lena, I said. I walked out of the cafe. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at a brick wall. I was scary to myself in that moment. I felt capable of anything. I felt capable of burning the world down, just to see them choke on the smoke. But I didn't burn anything. I called Celeste. I have the credit card statements. I said, identity theft. Going back 3 years. Bring them. Celeste said, that establishes a pattern. It proves the fire wasn't an isolated incident. It proves systemic financial abuse. And Eliana Celeste added, I have news on the tablet. I drove to her office. We traced the MAC address from the Northgate log. Celeste said, swiveling her monitor, it corresponds to an Apple iPad. Second generation. I looked at the device ID string. We ran a cross-reference with the cloud backups you provided. She continued, that device was registered to your Apple ID 4 years ago. You named it Eliana's Kitchen iPad. I remembered. I had bought it for recipes. I had left it at Marjorie's house when I moved out of my apartment and into the house on Juniper Ridge. I had meant to pick it up. I never did. It is still there, I said, in her house, and it is still logged in. Celeste said, or it was, on October 12th. That is the smoking gun. Eliana, that device, located in her home, on her Wi-Fi, signed your name on the insurance change. We have them. I said, we are close. Celeste said, but we need to secure that log before Northgate deletes it. We have the subpoena, but they are stalling. The next evening, there was a storm. It was a typical Oregon squall rain sideways. Wind howling. The town of Lake Haven organized an emergency preparedness forum at the high school gymnasium. It had been scheduled for weeks, but after the recent fires and floods, the turnout was high. I had been invited to speak, not as Eliana Morgan, the victim, but as Eliana Morgan, the founder of Morgan Recovery Consulting. I stood backstage, my hands shaking slightly. I smoothed my skirt. I was wearing a blazer I had bought at a consignment shop. It fit perfectly. The moderator introduced me. Please welcome a local expert on disaster documentation, Eliana Morgan. I walked out onto the stage. The lights were bright. The gym smelled of floor wax and wet raincoats. There were 300 people in the folding chairs. I took the microphone. Most people think disaster preparation is about buying canned food and flashlights. I said, my voice did not shake. And those things are important. But the real disaster often happens after the wind stops blowing. The room went quiet. The real disaster is the paperwork. I said, the real disaster is proving you existed. I spoke for 20 minutes. I told them to take photos of every room. I told them to scan their deeds and policies. I told them to email themselves copies of their receipts. I gave them the armor I wished I had had. I looked out at the faces. They were listening. They were nodding. I saw Mrs. Higgins from across the street. I saw Miles Arden standing in the back. For the first time in months, I did not feel like a ghost. I felt solid. I had taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and turned it into a shield for others. As I finished, the applause was genuine. It washed over me, warm and validating. And then I saw her. Marjorie was standing near the exit doors. She was wearing a soft pink cardigan, clutching a tissue. She looked frail. She looked like the perfect, grieving mother. As I stepped off the stage, she moved. She pushed through the crowd, heading straight for me. People parted for her, recognizing the connection. Eliana, she cried out. The room fell silent. She reached me before I could retreat. Oh, Eliana, she sobbed, reaching out to grab my arms. You are so brave. Look at you, up there talking about tragedy when you have shut us out completely. She was performing. I knew the script. I was supposed to hug her. I was supposed to cry. We were supposed to have a tearful reunion in front of the town, cementing her role as the supportive matriarch. I stepped back. Don't touch me, I said. It was not loud, but the microphone on the podium nearby caught it. The sound echoed through the gym. Don't touch me. Marjorie froze. Her face crumbled into a mask of shock. How can you be so cold, she wailed, turning to the crowd. She is my daughter. I have tried everything to help her. I offered her money. I offered her a home. And she treats me like a criminal. She was good. She was so good. You are ruining this family, Marjorie shouted, tears streaming down her face. You are destroying your brother, all because you cannot take responsibility for your own mistakes. The crowd shifted. I saw the doubt in their eyes. Marjorie looked like a heartbroken mother. I looked like a stone-faced daughter refusing a hug. But then, I saw Miles Arden step forward from the back. He didn't speak, but he crossed his arms and stared at Marjorie. I saw Mrs. Higgins frown and whisper something to her neighbor. And I realized something. I didn't need to win this scene. I just needed to not play her part. I did not yell. I did not defend myself. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw the panic behind her eyes. She was screaming because she was losing control. I am not ruining the family. Mom, I said, my voice projecting clearly without the mic. The truth is doing that all by itself. I turned and walked away. I walked past her. I walked through the crowd. Marjorie kept screaming, but the spell was broken. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was just a woman making a scene at a safety forum. I made it to the hallway. My heart was pounding like a trapped bird. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Celeste. Eliana. She said, I just got a tip from a contact inside Northgate. What is it? I asked, pressing the phone to my ear, blocking out the sound of my mother's voice from the gym. They are doing a system migration, Celeste said. Tonight, at midnight, they are purging all logs older than 90 days to clear space for the new server architecture. Tonight I looked at my watch. It was 8:30. If they run that purge, the log of the signature change is gone, Celeste said. We lose the device link. We lose the proof. What do we do? I am filing an emergency injunction right now, she said, but the judge is at home. I need to wake him up. And Eliana, I need you to meet me at the courthouse. We might have to physically serve the notice to Northgate's local data center if the digital transmission fails. Where's the data center? It is in Portland, she said, an hour away. I looked down the hallway. Marjorie was still in the gym, loud and chaotic. I am on my way, I said. I ran out into the rain. The storm was picking up again. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I had a narrow window. I had a tank of gas. And I had the burning, white-hot knowledge that my mother had stolen my name, my home, and my peace. She would not steal this. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, the tires screeching on the wet asphalt, heading toward the highway and the truth. The windshield wipers of my sedan were fighting a losing battle against the Oregon rain as I sped north on Interstate 5. It was 11 o'clock at night. The road was a slick black ribbon, the taillights of semi-trucks blurring into red streaks ahead of me. My phone was mounted on the dashboard, connected to the car's speakers. Celeste's voice was the only thing keeping me grounded. "We just got the signature," she said, her voice crackling slightly over the Bluetooth. Judge Holloway signed the emergency preservation order electronically. He was not happy about being woken up, but once I explained the imminent data purge, he moved fast. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. "Is it done? Did Northgate get it? I am serving it to their legal department and their IT compliance officer right now via email with a read receipt," Celeste said, "and I have a process server standing outside their data center in Portland just in case. They cannot delete those logs." "Eliana, if they do, they are in contempt of court, and that is a felony." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 months. The purge was scheduled for midnight. We had beaten the clock by 50 minutes. I pulled off the highway at the next exit, turning around to head back to Lake Haven. The adrenaline that had fueled my mad dash was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But as I drove back into the darkness of the storm, I knew something had shifted. We had the logs. We had the device ID. We had the digital fingerprint of the person who had stolen my safety. The reaction from Harbor Light Mutual was almost instant. The next morning, Celeste called me at 8. "You are not going to believe this," she said. "Mr. Sterling just called me. The lawyer with the expensive suit? The very same. His tone has changed. Eliana, yesterday, he was threatening to bury us in discovery requests for your therapy records. Today he wants to talk about expedited mediation." I sat up in my bed in the garage, pulling the quilt around me. "They know." I said, "They know we froze the evidence." Celeste agreed. "And they know that if those logs show what we think they show, that a third-party vendor allowed unauthorized changes from a device linked to your family. Harbor Light looks negligent at best and complicit at worst. They want this to go away before it becomes a class action lawsuit. They are scared." I said, "They are terrified," she corrected. But while Harbor Light was retreating, the physical evidence of the fire was becoming more damning. Grant Hallowell asked to meet me at the property later that week. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the charred skeleton of my house glistening in the weak sunlight. The state lab finally released the report. Grant said he was holding a thick file, and he opened it to a page marked with a red tab. "It was not just a rag," he said. "We found saturation in the subfloor plywood beneath the outlet." "What does that mean?" He looked at me, his face grim. "It means a liquid was poured there. Eliana, it soaked into the wood before the fire started. The rag was likely used to wipe up a spill, or maybe it was used as a wick, but the accelerant itself. It was a solvent called methyl ethyl ketone, MEK. I frowned. "What is that?" "It is a strong stripper," Grant said, "used for removing paint or cleaning heavy machinery. It is common in garages and workshops, but you do not use it to clean an electrical outlet, and you certainly do not pour it into the wall cavity. So it was intentional." I said, "The word tasted like ash. The report classifies the cause as incendiary." Grant said, "That is the official term for arson." He closed the file. "Harbor Light has a copy of this," he added. "That is why they are rushing to settle. They know it wasn't an accident. Now the only question is who held the match. The shift in the wind did not go unnoticed by my family." As the legal pressure on Harbor Light increased, the social pressure on me exploded. It started with a phone call from my Aunt Linda, Marjorie's younger sister. I had not spoken to her since Christmas. "Eliana," she said, her voice shrill, "your mother is in the hospital." My heart stopped for a second. Instinct was a hard thing to kill. "What happened?" "It is a stress-induced migraine," Linda said. "She is on an IV. The doctors say her blood pressure is through the roof. And do you know why? Because her own daughter is dragging the family name through the mud. I am not dragging anything," Aunt Linda, I said, my hand tightening on the phone. I am trying to get paid for my house that burned down. By accusing your mother of fraud, Linda snapped. She told us, Eliana, she told us you are inventing these conspiracies about hackers and tablets because you are broke and jealous that Darius is successful. Jealous, I almost laughed. Darius is drowning in debt. Do not lie about your brother. Linda shouted. He is a businessman. You are the one living in a garage. Marjorie says you are mentally unstable. She says you need help. We are all praying for you to stop this madness before you kill her with worry. I hung up. My hands were shaking. Then came the social media attacks. Darius didn't name me. He was too smart for that. But he posted a long status update on Facebook. It is sad when people you grow up with turn out to be snakes. Some people will weaponize lawsuits just to get a paycheck because they are too lazy to work. Stay strong. Mom, the truth always wins. Underneath, there were dozens of comments from family friends, people I had known my whole life. So sorry you are going through this. Darius, praying for Marjorie. Some people have no shame. They were rewriting my life in real time. To them, I wasn't the victim of arson and identity theft. I was a gold digger trying to extort my saintly mother. I felt the walls of the garage closing in on me. Isolation was their weapon. They were trying to shame me into silence. That was when Paige Lorne called. She was a reporter for the Lake Haven Ledger, the local paper. I had seen her byline on stories about city council corruption and school board scandals. Ms. Morgan, she said, I am working on a story about Harbor Light Mutual. I have heard rumors about a pattern of denied claims involving a vendor called Northgate. Your name came up in a court filing regarding a preservation order. I held the phone, listening to the hum of the line. I cannot quote you on the record about open litigation. Paige said, but I am looking for background. I am trying to understand how a massive insurer keeps getting away with this. I hesitated. My mother's voice echoed in my head. Don't air our dirty laundry. But then I looked at the comments on Darius's post again. Snakes in the grass. Silence does not buy safety. I realized, silence just buys them time to reload. I met Paige at a coffee shop 2 towns over. She was young, sharp, and took notes in shorthand that looked like hieroglyphics. I cannot talk about the specifics of my family, I said, sliding a redacted copy of the Northgate log across the table. But I can tell you about the system. I can tell you how a digital signature can be faked. I can tell you how a coverage change can happen without the homeowner ever knowing. Paige looked at the documents. This is systemic, she murmured. It is. I said, and if you dig, you will find others. I am just the one who refused to go away. Talking to her felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. It was terrifying, but it was fresh air. While the reporter dug into the insurance company, Celeste dug into the money. We were preparing for the mediation, gathering every scrap of financial data we could find to prove that I had been targeted. Celeste had run a background check on Darius and Marjorie, looking for judgments or liens. She found something else. Eliana, come look at this, Celeste said, pulling up a document on her computer screen. It was a filing with the Secretary of State, a certificate of formation for a limited liability company. Name, Morgan Hollow Property Group, LLC. Filing date, November 15th. Members, Darius Morgan, Marjorie Morgan, November, 2 months before the fire. I looked at the address. It was Darius's home address. Now look at this, Celeste said. She clicked to another tab. It was a purchase offer for a duplex on the south side of town. A distressed property, bank-owned. The offer was dated December 1st. The purchase price was $200,000. And look at the proof of funds, Celeste said, pointing to the attachment. I leaned in. It was a letter from a hard money lender, stating that the buyers had been pre-approved based on verified anticipated liquid assets derived from an insurance settlement. I froze. An anticipated insurance settlement, I asked. In December, the fire was in January. They were banking on a payout before the house even burned. Celeste said softly, or they were referring to a different policy, but look at the amount they listed as anticipated assets, $150,000. That was roughly the payout of my policy after the mortgage was paid off if the coverage had not been reduced. They did the math wrong. I whispered. They thought they would get the full value. They didn't know the coverage had been cut. Or, Celeste said, they cut the coverage to lower the premium so they could afford to keep paying it until the fire. But they didn't realize how much it would tank the final payout. They are not insurance experts. Eliana, they are amateurs. I stared at the screen. The motive wasn't just vague jealousy or control. It was cold, hard cash. Darius had debts. Lena had told me that. Marjorie wanted to be a real estate mogul. They saw my house not as my home, but as a piggy bank they could smash open. They formed an LLC. I said, my voice shaking. They built a business plan around burning down my house. It was so calculated, and yet, so clumsy. They were like children playing with matches in a library, burning down history just to find a nickel. We kept digging. The paper trail was a roadmap of their arrogance. Celeste subpoenaed the phone records for the authorized representative who had called Harbor Light. We found notes in the Harbor Light customer service logs. Date November 10th. Caller Marjorie Morgan, auth rep. Notes. Caller stated policyholder Eliana is traveling and approved verbal changes to beneficiary structure. Advised caller that written signature is required. Caller became agitated. She tried to change the beneficiary. I said she wanted the check to go straight to her, and when they said no, Celeste said she likely resorted to the digital signature method via Northgate. She impersonated you because she couldn't legally act for you. She forged my consent, I said, and then she called me ungrateful when the plan fell apart. I went to work the next day, but I was a ghost. I sat in my cubicle in the back-end analytics department, staring at spreadsheets that meant nothing. David, my boss, walked by. He didn't make eye contact. I looked at the clock. It was 10 in the morning. I had a business waiting for me. Morgan Recovery Consulting. I had 3 new emails from potential clients in my inbox, people who had heard me speak at the forum. People who read the blog post I had written about documenting assets. I was making money. Not a lot. Not yet. But enough to pay Miles Arden's rent. Enough to buy food. I stood up. I picked up the box of personal items I had never fully unpacked. I walked to David's office. He was on the phone. He looked up, surprised to see me standing in his doorway. David, I said. He held up a finger, signaling me to wait. I didn't wait. I am resigning. I said, effective immediately. He lowered the phone. Eliana, be rational. You have health insurance here. You have a salary. You can't just walk out. I can? I said, and I am. I didn't give him a reason. I didn't owe him an explanation. I placed my ID badge on his desk. It made a small click against the glass. I walked out of the building. The air outside was cold, but it felt clean. I was terrified. I had no steady paycheck. I was suing a massive corporation. My family was hunting me. But as I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't safe, but I was free. Mediation day arrived with a gray steel sky. The meeting was held at a neutral law firm in downtown Portland. The conference room was vast, with a table long enough to land a plane on. On one side sat Mr. Sterling and 3 other lawyers from Harbor Light. They looked serious, expensive, and bored. On the other side sat Celeste and me. Mr. Sterling opened his briefcase. Ms. Morgan, he began, his voice smooth as oil. We are here to find a resolution. Harbor Light acknowledges that there were irregularities in the handling of your policy file via our vendor. Irregularities, I repeated. You mean fraud. We are prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement, he continued, ignoring my comment. We want to make you whole. He slid a piece of paper across the table. I looked at the number, $350,000. It was enough to pay off the mortgage. It was enough to rebuild the house. It was enough to buy a new car and put a down payment on a second property. It was life-changing money. But then I looked at the second paragraph. Confidentiality and non-disparagement agreement. The plaintiff agrees to keep the terms of this settlement and the facts surrounding the dispute strictly confidential. The plaintiff agrees to destroy all copies of discovery materials, including but not limited to digital logs from Northgate Policy Solutions. They were buying the evidence. They were buying the logs that proved their system was vulnerable. And they were buying my silence. If I signed this, I could never tell anyone what Marjorie did. I could never explain why the coverage changed. To the world, it would look like a lucky break. To my family, it would look like I got away with it. I looked at Celeste. She gave me a tiny nod. It was a good offer. Financially, it was a home run. Mr. Sterling watched me. We believe this is very generous. Ms. Morgan, it allows you to move on. Move on. That was the phrase everyone used. Move on. Leave the ashes behind. I thought about the sticky note in my car. No more pleading for love from people who trade it. I thought about the women at Emberline Commons. I thought about Mrs. Higgins. I thought about Miles Arden. If I signed this, the truth about the fire would stay buried. Marjorie would continue to play the victim. Darius would continue to borrow money he couldn't pay back. And I would be the rich, silent daughter who got lucky. I pushed the paper back across the table. No, I said. Mr. Sterling blinked. I beg your pardon. I will not sign the confidentiality agreement. I said, Ms. Morgan, he said, his voice sharpening. That is a standard clause. The offer is contingent upon it. Then take the offer back. I said, Eliana, Celeste whispered, touching my arm. I turned to her. I know. Celeste. But I can't. I turned back to Sterling. I will accept the money. I said, it is what you owe me for the house. But I have one condition. And what is that? He asked, looking annoyed. I want an admission. I said, I want a written statement from Harbor Light Mutual acknowledging that the coverage change on October 12th was unauthorized and fraudulent, and that it was executed via a device not in my possession. Sterling laughed, a short, dry bark. We will never admit liability. That opens us up to third-party suits. Then we go to trial. I said, I stood up. Mr. Sterling stopped laughing. He looked at his colleagues. They whispered frantically. If we go to trial, I said, leaning my hands on the table. Paige Lorne runs her story on Sunday. She has the redacted logs. She knows about the Northgate purge. And once that is public, every policyholder in Oregon is going to wonder if their coverage was changed too. Sterling went pale. You are bluffing, he said. Try me. I said, I have nothing left to lose. I live in a garage. I have no job. I have no family. You cannot scare me with poverty. Mr. Sterling, I am already there. But you have a stock price to worry about. I sat back down. The silence in the room was absolute. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a hammer. Sterling pulled out his phone. I need to call the general counsel, he muttered. He walked out of the room. Celeste looked at me. Her eyes were wide. That was risky. I don't want their money if it buys my silence. Celeste, I said, I want the truth. We waited for 20 minutes. When Sterling came back, he looked like he had swallowed a lemon. We can draft a statement of facts, he said stiffly. It will not admit negligence on Harbor Light's part, but it will confirm that the coverage change was determined to be invalid due to unauthorized third-party access, and I can publish that I asked. He grit his teeth. It will be a public record, and the confidentiality clause. We will remove the clause regarding the facts of the claim, he said, but the settlement amount stays private. I looked at Celeste. She smiled. Deal. I said, I signed the papers an hour later. My hand didn't shake. I walked out of the building with a check that would change my life. But that wasn't what made my heart race. I had the paper, the statement of facts. Determined to be invalid due to unauthorized third-party access originating from a device identified as... It didn't name Marjorie, but it described the iPad. It described the location. It described the fraud. It was a weapon, and I was going to lay it on the table for everyone to see. I drove back to Lake Haven. I stopped at the post office. I made 3 copies of the statement. I put one in an envelope addressed to Darius. I put one in an envelope addressed to Aunt Linda. I put one in an envelope addressed to the pastor of my mother's church. And the original, I kept that for Marjorie. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting in the dark. I had turned on the lights, and everyone was about to see exactly what was scurrying across the floor. The check arrived via courier on a Tuesday morning. It was inside a thick, cream-colored envelope, accompanied by a document that was legally termed a statement of facts, though my lawyer, Celeste Whitaker, called it a undenial letter. I sat at the small table in my garage apartment and stared at the paper. Harbor Light Mutual acknowledges that on October 12th, unauthorized access to the policyholder's account occurred via a third-party vendor portal. This access resulted in coverage modifications that were not initiated by the policyholder. It did not say, Marjorie Morgan committed fraud. It did not say, Northgate Policy Solutions is a criminal enterprise. It was sterilized, corporate language, but attached to it was a check for $350,000, plus an additional $20,000 for relocation expenses. It was a fortune. It was freedom. And yet, holding it felt like holding a grenade that had already exploded, leaving me holding the pin while the rest of the world looked at the wreckage. Harbor Light had paid me to go away. They had paid me to stop digging into the connection between their vendor and the conveniently timed coverage reductions that seemed to plague homeowners in this county. They had offered a quiet side agreement, a promise that they would not pursue me for any further legal costs if I simply cashed the check and let the system error narrative stand. I sensed their fear. It radiated off the paper. They were terrified that if I kept pushing, I would find not just a glitch, but a pattern. But I had signed the paper. I had taken the money. Because Celeste was right, you cannot eat justice. You cannot live inside a moral victory. I needed a roof. I needed a future. The next day, Grant Hallowell called me. I have the final fire report. He said, I met him at the fire station. He handed me the file. I flipped to the conclusion page. Cause of ignition undetermined. I looked up at him. Undetermined, I asked. I thought we had the accelerant. I thought we had the tampered outlet. We do, Grant said, but without a confession or video footage of someone striking the match. The district attorney will not file arson charges. It is too circumstantial. So, we mark it undetermined. He tapped the page. But Eliana, listen to me. Undetermined is not accidental. Accidental means the case is closed. Undetermined means the file stays open. It means the insurance company can never claim you were negligent. And it means that if any new evidence ever surfaces 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we can move immediately. It is a warning shot. I said, exactly, Grant said. It tells everyone involved that we know something happened. We just cannot prove who did it yet. It keeps them looking over their shoulders. I walked out of the station. It wasn't the handcuffs and sirens ending I had fantasized about in my darkest moments, but it was a stain, and stains are hard to wash out. 2 days later, the stain began to spread. Paige Lorne published her article in the Lake Haven Ledger. The headline was, Careful Claims Denied Investigation Reveals Digital Vulnerabilities in Local Insurance Adjustments. She did not name me. She did not name Marjorie, but she laid out the timeline. She described a local homeowner who lost everything because a family member with access to old devices altered a policy. She described the Northgate purge. She described the pattern of reduced coverage. Lake Haven is a small town, a town where everyone knows whose truck is parked in whose driveway. The article didn't need to name names. The town filled in the blanks. I went to the grocery store that afternoon. I saw Mrs. Gable, the choir director who had cornered me weeks ago. When she saw me coming down the aisle, she didn't block my path. She turned her cart around and practically ran toward the bakery. I saw the whispers. I saw the way people looked at me not with pity anymore, but with a strange, guarded respect. And I heard the rumors about Marjorie. I heard she tried to cut her own daughter out. I heard the police are looking at her bank accounts. I heard she isn't allowed to volunteer at the hospital anymore. Marjorie had spent 30 years building a fortress of reputation. She had used my silence as the mortar. Now that I had stopped being silent, the bricks were falling out. But Marjorie Morgan did not hide. She attacked. She came to the garage 3 nights after the article ran. I heard her car door slam, aggressive and loud. I opened the door. She stood there in the driveway, illuminated by the motion sensor light. She wasn't crying. There was no performance tonight. No grieving mother act. Her face was hard, stripped of all the soft, maternal camouflage she usually wore. "Are you happy?" she asked. Her voice was ice. I looked at her. "I am not happy. Mom, my house burned down. You have your money." She spat, gesturing to the garage. "You have your big check, and you have managed to humiliate us in front of the entire town." Paige Lorne called me for a comment. "Can you believe that a reporter calling my house? You could have just told the truth." I said, "The truth." Marjorie laughed. But it wasn't the awkward laugh from the night of the fire. It was bitter. "You want the truth." Eliana. "Here is the truth. You owed us." I stared at her. "I owed you." "Yes," she shouted, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea how difficult you were as a teenager? You were exhausting. You were moody. You were selfish. You went to that expensive college and left me here to deal with everything. You built your little life, your little career, and you never stopped to think about who got you there. I was a child. Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I was a normal teenager, and I paid for my own college." "You were a burden," she screamed, "a constant, heavy burden. And then you get this house, and you sit there acting like you are better than us, better than Darius." "This is about Darius?" I asked. "Darius has had bad luck," she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. "He tries so hard. He just needed a break. And you had all that equity sitting there, doing nothing. You didn't even have a husband to leave it to. It was just waste." I felt a cold clarity wash over me. "So you decided to redistribute it," I said. "You decided that because I was difficult 15 years ago, you were entitled to strip my assets today. It stayed in the family." She said, "It was supposed to stay in the family. We were going to pay you back eventually, after the deal went through. But you had to make it a tragedy. You had to call the lawyers." She looked at me with genuine disgust. "You are so selfish. Eliana, that is your rot. You think everything belongs to you." I looked at this woman. I looked at the mother I had spent my entire adult life trying to please. I realized she didn't hate me. It was worse than that. She viewed me as an appliance that had stopped working and needed to be scrapped for parts. "I don't owe you my life, Mom," I said quietly, "and I definitely don't owe you my house." I closed the door in her face. She pounded on it once, hard, then silence, then the sound of her engine roaring away. Darius showed up the next morning. He didn't look like the slick businessman anymore. He looked unwashed. He wore a hoodie, and his eyes were bloodshot. He stood in the driveway, refusing to come inside. "Mom is going crazy," he said. "She is talking about suing Paige Lorne. She is talking about suing you. Let her." I said, "Eliana." "Look," he said, rubbing his face. "I didn't know it would go this far. You didn't know I asked. You formed the LLC. Darius, you signed the papers. I thought it was just paperwork," he burst out. "It sounds so stupid now, but it didn't feel real. It was just clicking buttons on a screen. Mom said we needed to lower the premium to save cash flow. I didn't think about the fire. I really didn't. And the digital signature I asked, the identity theft, that was Mom." He said quickly. She pushed me. She said, "Do it, Darius. She won't mind. She never checks her accounts." I just wanted to get her off my back. You know how she gets. She grinds you down. I watched him. I watched a 37-year-old man try to hide behind his mother's skirts while simultaneously throwing her under a bus. He was handing me the guilt. He was holding it out like a hot coal, desperate for me to take it so he wouldn't have to burn. "She says it is your fault," Darius said. "She says if you had just lent me the money last year, none of this would have happened. I didn't say anything. And she says it is my fault for not handling you better," he continued, his voice cracking. "She is eating us alive. Eliana, Lena left. Did you know that Lena took the baby and went to her sister's in Seattle?" I felt a pang of sadness for Lena, but it was distant. I am sorry about Lena. I said. Darius looked at me, his eyes pleading. Can't you just say something? Tell the lawyer it was a misunderstanding. If you pull back the statement, maybe Harbor Light will back off. Maybe the bank will unfreeze the accounts. I shook my head. I can't fix this for you. Darius, you are my sister, he shouted, suddenly angry. You are supposed to help. No. I said, I was your sister when you stole my identity. I was your sister when you watched my house burn. I was your sister when you tried to make me sign a predatory loan. You didn't want a sister then. You wanted a victim. I stepped back. Go home. Darius. He stood there for a long minute, looking at the garage, looking at me. Then he turned and walked away. His shoulders slumped, a man defeated by his own hollowness. I realized then that my true power was not in punishment. I didn't need to send them to prison. I didn't need to bankrupt them. They were doing that to themselves. My power was refusal. I refused to be their shield. I refused to be their excuse. I refused to be the sponge that absorbed their chaos so they could stay dry. For 30 years, I had played my part in their play. Now, I had walked off the stage, and the show was collapsing because there was no one left to carry the scenery. The legal battle had one final chapter. Even though I had settled with Harbor Light, the lawsuit against Northgate Policy Solutions was still active. My preservation order had triggered a state investigation into their data practices. Celeste called me on a Friday. There is a hearing on Monday regarding the permanent injunction against Northgate. She said, the Attorney General is getting involved. They want to interview you. I can do that. I said, and Eliana. Harbor Light's attorneys reached out. They hinted that if you testify about the tablet about the specific device in your mother's home, they might cooperate with the state against Northgate. They want to pin the breach entirely on the vendor and the fraudulent actor. The fraudulent actor being my mother. If you testify, Celeste warned, her voice serious, you are putting a target on your back. It will be public record. Marjorie will read it. The town will read it. You will be the daughter who took the stand against her family. I thought about the silence in the grocery store. I thought about the whispers. If I don't testify, I asked, what happens? Northgate might settle quietly with a fine. Celeste said, the records get sealed. The specific details of how they let this happen and who did it get buried. I looked out the window of the garage. The sun was shining. The garden Miles Arden had planted was blooming. I will testify. I said, before the hearing, I received a text message from Lena. She must have unblocked me. Just so you know, Marjorie is selling the jewelry and the antique dining set. She called Darius's boss trying to get an advance on his salary, and he got fired. It is over. Eliana, the house of cards is down. You don't have to push anymore. I stared at the screen. They were collapsing. The financial ruin they had tried to inflict on me had boomeranged back to them. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt a profound, heavy sadness. It was a waste of a family, a waste of love. But Lena was wrong about one thing. I wasn't pushing. I was just standing still. I went to the courthouse. I wore my best suit. I walked through the metal detectors. Mr. Sterling, the Harbor Light lawyer, nodded to me in the hallway. He looked respectful now. Fear does that. We are ready to support your statement. Ms. Morgan, he said quietly. I didn't smile. I just nodded. I took the stand. The courtroom was cold. The judge looked tired. I swore to tell the truth. Ms. Morgan, the Attorney General's deputy asked, can you describe the events of October 12th? I described them. I described the training seminar. I described the parking receipt. And did you authorize any changes to your policy on that date? No. Do you know who did? I took a breath. The courtroom was silent. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Yes, I said. The digital signature was traced to a device located at 442 Sycamore Drive, the home of my mother, Marjorie Morgan. A ripple went through the room, and Ms. Morgan, the deputy continued, did you have any knowledge that your mother was accessing your accounts? No. I said, I trusted her. He paused. He looked at his notes. One final question. On the night of the fire, What was your mother's reaction when you called her for help? I looked at the jury box. I looked at the gallery. I saw Paige Lorne sitting in the back row, pen poised. I remembered the smoke. I remembered the cold pavement. I remembered the desperate need for a voice that cared. She laughed. I said, my voice did not shake. She laughed and told me that was what happened when I didn't do things right. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. It wasn't a shocked silence. It was a sad one. It was the sound of people realizing that some monsters don't live under beds. They live in sunrooms and drive sedans. I stepped down from the stand. I didn't look at the back of the room to see if Marjorie was there. I didn't care. I walked out of the courtroom. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The air was cold. It hit my face like a slap, sharp and waking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Unknown number. You are dead to us. Unknown number. Ungrateful brat. Simona Rivas. So proud of you. Drinks on me tonight. Miles Arden. I made stew. It is on the stove. I looked at the messages. The hate and the love. Side by side. I put the phone back in my pocket. I had lost my house. I had lost my family. I had lost the illusion that I was safe. But as I walked down the concrete steps, I realized I had gained something else. I had gained the ability to walk away. I didn't turn back to look at the courthouse. I didn't turn back to look at the town that had whispered about me. I walked toward my car. I had a check in my purse. I had a business to run. I had a bowl of stew waiting for me. The fire had burned everything down, but the ground was cleared, and for the first time in my life, whatever I built next would be mine. I unlocked the car door, got in, and drove forward.